So I've been struggling with this concept in relation to teaching children how to play TTRPGs like Dungeons and Dragons, Monster of the Week, The Cunning Folk, Starfinder, those games, right? And it basically boils down to this question of how do I how do I teach kids about the concept of evil, right? So, but back up a second. On the outschool.com platform, which is a fantastic platform for kids who want to take classes in just about anything, you can find me on there. Just search my name. And I teach several classes, but two of my big ones are Dungeons and Dragons Mythic League for kids who know how to play D&D already, have any sort of experience in it, and are just looking for a group. And we kind of agree on what level we'll start out, what kind of adventure we're going to go for, and then we go. The other one is the D&D Beginners League, and I love those because these are kids who have no experience in it whatsoever. And so we spend the first session, like hour and a half, pretty much going over how to not only how to play the game, but building a character and doing our session zero, our red light, yellow light, green light stuff, all that stuff. And one of the big things we deal with is that I always tell the kids up front is in my world, in this fantasy world that they're going to be playing in, species like orcs, goblins, kobolds, sapient, sentient, fully self-aware, intelligent species, however you measure intelligence, they are fully integrated into modern societies and cities and towns and villages, what have you, just as much as dwarves, humans, elves, gnomes, halflings, all of them. And as far as which came first, that question doesn't matter. No one in this world thinks about that, or at least not seriously. And that if you're looking for pockets of these peoples who might be dastardly, it's not because they're a kobold or goblin or orc. It's because they belong to a culture or group that, for whatever reason, is at odds with the party's culture, right? And that these groups can be removed from or separated from modern societies by geographic features or warfare, magical happenings that have separated parts of the world, etc. Now, obviously, that's not a perfect setup, and the thing with fantasy is it never will be a perfect setup. And I'm also, waiting for the usual voices in the TTRPG sphere to just come out of the woodwork on this as usual and, exclaim, oh, the white game master is finally learning about racism. I promise I study as much as I possibly can and learn every day more and more how to implement these things. I have a degree in history. I have a degree in psychology. And in my main career, aside from teaching kids how to play these games, I am a social studies teacher and a student of history who is constantly learning all the time. And as far as, pedigree on these issues, I can talk about a college class I took that delved into Blumenbach, okay, this German proto-anthropologist and doctor, scientist, what have you, who in the, I think it's 1800s or late 1700s, put forward his hierarchy of races, right? And this guy unintentionally set up modern structural racism by doing this, mainly because he himself was just head over heels for anyone from the Caucasus region. He thought that they were the most beautiful people on earth. Caucasus region, which is modern day, Azerbaijan, Armenia, that area, Georgia, right? He's German. He sees these people, thinks they're the most beautiful people in the world, and therefore he believes they must have been the original humans, and all these other groups are degenerates. Now, he didn't mean that term exactly the same way back then as we perceive it now, but you see where the problems arise. And we get into modern fantasy because late 1700s, early 1800s, we get all the way to Tolkien's time. That stuff that Blumenbach established was not simply just in academia. It is now fully in the white people's zeitgeist, right? And no matter how much I've come around on Tolkien, especially in his depiction of dwarves and his actual letters in talking about it and what his intentions were, there are still incredibly problematic and racist foundational elements in how he portrays other races within the seminal fantasy work that laid the groundwork for everything we do today. All that being said, I struggle when I get a kid that comes in and says, okay, my character is a dwarf and he hates orcs because orcs killed his family when he was young. Like, I struggle because I don't want to tell the kid straight up, like, hey man, that's super racist. But because this kid, none of these kids ever mean it malevolently, right? And that's the scary part, is how subtle this stuff gets in deep early on. And while I am fully aware of this dynamic and why it occurs, why it's there, it's always been there. I mean, it's one thing I kind of struggle with a little bit with Baldur's Gate 3. Amazing game. Baldur's Gate, my favorite game series of all time. Even within Baldur's Gate, there are elements that are still like kind of anchored down within the modern Dungeons and Dragons setting where, like, yeah, you know, these particular goblins are pretty rough. And even though there are some outliers there, for instance, it fully shows a academic hobgoblin, an academic illithids who separate from the main illithid group in thinking, right? There are also elements where, like Asterion, everyone's favorite emo vampire buddy, Asterion is really racist. Asterion says trashy goblins at one point, right? He's racist. So it's obvious that fantasy struggles with this stuff. I am particularly like exposed to it in a unique way with kids coming in with preconceived notions about, well, that's just fantasy. Like they're orcs, right? They're evil. They're you know, I don't even want to finish that sentence, but you get what the stereotypes are. And I struggle a lot trying to explain to kids and deconstruct all of that in terms of this thing. Because, and you have to be careful with kids. I'm a teacher. I have a lot of experience with this. Telling a kid they're wrong in any way, shape, or form, no matter how easy you do it, how soft and gentle and kind you are with it, there's always a little part of them that takes it really personally and hurts them a little bit. And sometimes that pain is necessary. And by the way, it's not simply, I was going to say, you know, majority kids. I'm just going to say it's not simply white kids who come in with these preconceived notions and prejudices about fantasy species or races, right? And when we come to the concept of evil, you know, I even struggle with this within my own world with gnolls, because lore-wise, gnolls, these hyena people, right? They are supposed to be purely the products of a demon lord, and this is its way of propagating a physical manifestation in the world. And they're supposed to be these big, evil, somewhat, I guess, soulless, gosh, I hate saying this stuff, you know, setups for you to fight against. And I think that's the thing. You always have to ask, why do you need that species or that race to be that way? Why do you need them to be evil? And speaking of evil, what does that even mean? As a social studies teacher, whenever that term comes up, I always tell my kids, we can think of acts, we can think of effects, we can think of occurrences and those things as evil. But thinking of people as evil is useless. It's useless because every horrific figure in history, we can look at their life and not to be fully sympathetic to them. People can be bad people because of the choices they make, but we can look at how those things led, how their environments, how outside factors led them to where they ended up. There's a wonderful, wonderful podcast. I try not to swear too much on this account, but a wonderful podcast called Behind the Bastards. I have listened to every single episode of it for the many years it's been on. So many hours, probably hundreds of hours at this point, of delving into horrific people's backstories, right? And that has really influenced my idea of evil and how useless it is in describing people. Because if someone's just evil, if a person is just evil, if a people are just evil, then there's nothing we can do about it, right? There's no outside factors to consider. All of this rambling, aimless rant is to say, this is a big thing that I struggle with explaining to children without having to, you know, make them feel that they were wrong in thinking this. And I'll tell you what, some kids fight it. Some kids just have to believe that there are evil species out there. And it's hard to explain to them how that starts a very troubling path for them when it comes to the real world. Now, look, I don't need anyone coming into the comments saying, hey, orcs can just be evil. I'm just going to delete your comment, okay? But, suggestions are welcome. This is more just to get the conversation going about this specific aspect of this topic.